Hi everyone. I am so excited today to be speaking to Emily Holleman, and we are going to be talking about her book series that she calls the Fall of Egypt series. And she has the books.
Yep,
and there's Cleopatra'S Shadow, that's number 1, and then The Drowning King, number 2. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Emily. I am so excited.
I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad to be chatting with you.
I'm going to have to admit something. Well, I read the Cleopatra book not knowing it was a series because I got recommended to you on Facebook. Okay, and what they failed to mention, and it's kind of my fault too, but I never research a book because I like to read it and not know stuff. Because that's just me. I'm weird. I don't like to know reviews. I don't like to know, people are like, you have to read this book. I'm like, okay, I get the book. I ask you to come on here. And then I go to research on it. I'm like, oh no, there's another book.
No, I think that's phenomenal. I like that. I love approaching something without having any preconceptions about what you're going to get and just being able to.
Yeah, you get too many opinions. Too many, as much as people love Amazon book reviews, and I try not to go on there until I'm done. I really don't, because I have my own opinion then, and I don't have to read their opinions about what I'm going to do. So it was just interesting to me because I did feel like there was another one at the end, and then I went on. I was like, that's okay, because I did my research on all of it, and what I love about historical fiction, and anybody who looks at my videos can tell, I am a historical fiction person. People will say to me, do you read anything else? Yes, I try to read other things, but I get really stuck on historical fiction. But when somebody recommended your book, the reason I was so excited is because I realized I knew nothing about Cleopatra. And I was like, oh, I need to know stuff. That is one time frame, ancient Egypt, ancient Rome. I'm really not good at that time period, but it was so much fun reading it through your eyes and seeing them like a family. And then so it sends me down this rabbit hole because I'm a research person, and I started doing and then all of a sudden, because I'm like, okay, if I'm going to talk to Emily, I got to know stuff. So I'll at least start to know her family tree, and I gave up, Emily. So kudos to you on the family tree, okay?
Well, the Ptolemy family tree is really complicated, so it gets, as anyone who's listening to, there's a lot of sibling marriage, there's a lot of incest, there's a lot of sibling marriage, there's a lot of uncle, stepsister, stepbrother, it's a very convoluted family tree, and trying to trace it back, and not everyone agrees on it, which is the sort of interesting thing about writing historical fiction, in this era versus in, the Regency or during Henry VIII, because you have information there. People kept diaries that we still have today that are on this date we did these things, and it's very, very sort of exact, and the history is just so much closer to us. Whereas 2,000 years ago, especially with all that has been lost to the ages, there's a lot more of well, some people think that this person was, even the identity of Cleopatra'S mother, for instance, is not agreed upon by historians.
Yeah, which I didn't know. And I think it's really funny that I go on your Amazon page before we did this, and somebody made a comment and said, this is not about Cleopatra. I was like, it didn't even say it on the title that it was about. It was interesting that people take that title, because if you really look at it and if you read the back, you get what it's about. I mean, it really doesn't take too much. It's not that hidden about what it's about. So
yeah. The thing is, people are going to pick up books and want something, and sometimes it's, not what they're expecting, not what they want. I mean, who knows? But it is funny. It is funny what people sort of...
I loved the title because I thought it actually really depicted what the book was about, to me. Because I was like, oh, how cute, because it's these other, her other family members that nobody really talks about, and they're kind of in the shadow of Cleopatra. I love that. That to me was brilliant. So, just so you have my opinion on it, I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. No, I really like the title. It was the title a working title of mine for a long time with that first book, and I really like it. But, people read people see what they want and get excited about things, and then,
Right.
Sometimes I like it and sometimes I don't.
Right. Right, and then, when I started to get really interested in watching different documentaries on her, because I thought that, well, if I watched more documentaries, I'd get more about her family. That's not true. So anybody who wants to do that, that is not true.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what first sort of drew me to this entire story, is because there's this enormous cultural interest in Cleopatra, and there has been basically since the ancient times.
Right.
But so little of it all is focused, and it makes sense for a variety of reasons. It's all focused on this Roman outlook and this, like, her relationship with Caesar and her relationship with Antony, which makes a lot of sense, first of all, because the Roman Empire, at the end of Cleopatra's life, subsumes the Egyptian Empire, so history is told by the victors. Her relationship to the victorious peoples is what's going to be important. And also because she's a woman, and because her being powerful has to be sort of boiled down to this, like, oh, she was so beautiful, she was so seductive, she had these powerful men in her thrall. And, I mean, what really interested me in telling this story about her siblings was I'm kind of an ancient history geek, but I didn't know very much about her family going into this. When I started reading and researching about her, I was like, oh, wow, there's this whole other way of viewing her that we never see her sort of in the context of her family, her ruling dynasty. It's always very much from the perspective of the Romans and from these men that she, had these liaisons with.
Right.
So.
I know there's like this, because of the movies, the different movies there's this like buildup of her as a certain, but then there's like this real her. And your book does not, like I said, your book isn't about her. It's about her sisters. And just so everybody understands that. And I love that. And on your website, today when I was doing the research, you said, I'm a younger sister, and I really approach this as a younger sister. Well, I have my two middle children are my daughters, okay? And they're 4 years apart. So I called my younger daughter today. She's 22. And I said, what does that mean? And she's like, because I don't have a sister, okay? I have a brother, but I'm like, what does she mean by that? I mean, what's it like being the younger sister? And she was like, it's so hard. And I of course she's 22 and she's and she's cute and she's dramatic a little, but it was just like so funny to hear her side, because I think my older daughter would say, you don't even understand how hard it is to be the older daughter. She would probably take on her role, but it was really cute to hear her say like what she looks up to. They're very close now after, and I don't know if you're very close with your sister, but, it's a different dynamic. I mean, that relationship, out of all my children, they're the ones that are the constant. Talk every day, the boys are just like the peripheral, Yeah.
No, I mean, there's like a combination of, I'm very close with my older sister. But there's this sort of, especially as kids, there's this sense, and I think that you grow out of it, and I think that your younger daughter, as they get older, I think that this dynamic, I mean, it persists in some ways, but it's sort of, you grow out of it a little bit, is the sense of, like, always, you're never as good as they are at anything, it feels like, right? Because, I mean, my sister's 3 years older than I am, and when we were kids, she was just categorically better at everything, because she was 3 years older than I was. Like, she was just going to be better at it, because, when you're 3 and 6, like, 6-year-olds can do a lot of things that 3-year-olds are just not capable of doing. And so it always, that constant feeling of like, oh wow, this person who's so close to me and I'm so close with, but is always just like one step, like this sort of insurmountable step ahead on some level. And so that's what sort of interested me, especially if you were imagining having Cleopatra be that your sister, who is sort of the ultimate, like, I mean, she's the first woman that not anyone, but generally speaking, if you're talking to people about history, if they're like, who's the earliest woman that you can name, Cleopatra is going to be among a small group of people that, you can talk about. So
yeah, exactly. And my older daughter's married and has children, and my younger daughter's still in college. So they do have that dynamic. Maybe one day when they're both married and both have children, that'll all equal out. But on this case, so in your book, what I found so interesting is that, and I don't want to say these names wrong, so I'm going to let you say it. But the younger daughter is, younger sister, Arsinoe. Is that it? Arsinoe?
Sorry, Arsinoe. Arsinoe. It's okay. I, first of all, pronounced Hermione's name as Hermione for like a good first half of my Harry Potter experience. So don't worry about it. And it's a hard name and nobody knows how to pronounce it. So yeah, Arsinoe.
I'm looking at the spelling again. Okay, so so she isn't just she's young in this book, okay? She's like 8 and 9. in the beginning of the book and doesn't age much more at the end of this book. So we aren't talking about, even a teenager, but what amazes me is in this time period, like even children that age, there were things expected of them. And it maybe, I was going to ask you, is it because they didn't really live long? Was that why teenagers, because they were like you were talking about at the one point when her brother was going through puberty at 12, and it's like, okay, he's only 12, to us, it's like he's a 12-year-old kid. In their culture, I guess that meant something, right?
Yeah, I mean, the ancient Greeks and sort of Egyptians, they actually didn't all have super short lifespans. Some people lived to be older, but there was definitely, it's also the idea of like childhood as this like time of like innocence and sort of like a protected idea is a pretty modern phenomenon. Like the idea that that children aren't just expected to sort of like, they need to be educated, but they also need to be like educated into these roles that they have to fulfill. And certainly, I mean, Alexander the Great, for instance, if we're thinking about like who would have been like respected figures at the time, I mean, he was conquering most of the so-called known world by the time he was 16 years. I mean, he was a teenager. I mean, he was a young guy. Wow. So like the expectations are very, very high that you basically, certainly by the time you are physically, like there's not the sense of like having to, I mean, they were very intellectual in lots of ways, but there's not the sense that like you need to wait until you are really able to understand things. I mean, although on the other hand, like the Romans had a very strange relationship with this because men, of course, were kind of allowed to like mess around until they were about 30 in Rome. Like they weren't expected to get married. They like should probably start careers, but they were sort of expected to be having these like affairs essentially with the married women of their own age, because the married women would all be married to men who were like 30 years older than them, because the women, of course, in Rome got married at 12, whereas the men would just sort of like, I mean, this is among the aristocrats, would just sort of like have fun and sleep with married ladies, and like it's a very different, sorry, that went completely off track, but the point is, yes, there was certainly like a lot of expectations on children, and also I think that's part of it is the unpredictability, right? You don't know when, especially as someone who might be inheriting, when like you might be expected to step into these like very powerful positions.
Right, which kind of happened. I mean, somebody gets killed, but then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's you.
Yep.
You're king.
Here you go. And especially in times when of war, although, I mean, I guess in the first book there is a sort of internecine rebellion, but they're not at war with an outer power. But yeah, I mean, people died unexpectedly, and especially dying in any kind of, life was just not that life is predictable now, but there are a lot more things that you couldn't control in the ancient world.
It seemed like a lot more fear of each other.
Yeah, I think there's definitely
in the family.
Yeah, I mean, the Ptolemies had like a pretty good reason to be sort of fearful for each other, because they did not, I mean, ironically, part of the justification for the sibling marriage, which goes back to the sort of second generation of the Ptolemies. So it was two things. One, they wanted to sort of harken back to the like the real ancient Egyptians, because the Ptolemies are these Macedonians who come in from, Macedonia, and they're ruling after Alexander the Great has conquered all these places and then gets split between his generals. But they want to harken back to like the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom, which were native Egyptian rulers who were ruling for a very long period of time in a very stable way. And they did sibling marriage. And that was part of their, like, we are gods. We are part of the godly world, not the earthly world. That's why it's okay for us to do this. But ironically, of course, the other reason is that the idea would be it would stop people from having all of these, like, sibling rivalry coups. Because if you're marrying your siblings, it consolidates power in the family, as opposed to, like, if your sister marries some, like, Seleucid or whatever, and then they start getting their eyes on the kingdom. Obviously, this did not work at all, because the Ptolemies end up vying for power between each other constantly. And so it's not a successful thing. But it's a lot of, like, you sort of take your normal family pressure and your normal family dynamics, and then you throw in, like, probably marrying one of your brothers, maybe having it be an actual, like, marriage the way we have it, maybe not, like unclear, and then also just this enormous amount of power vested in one family, and that sort of adds, I mean, it sort of basically heightens every kind of small dispute into this idea of like who's on whose side, and that has enormous stakes. It's not just like fighting over Thanksgiving dinner or whatever. It's like you are fighting for a kingdom and for an enormous amount of power. So
yeah, I know. That's what I was thinking. About my brother. I was like, remember, imagine if you weren't just fighting over the TV set and you were actually like fighting over a kingdom or something. Like it's like it takes it to another level.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It just makes every interaction like sort of become all the more sort of important and have these like enormous like global repercussions. So
right, and I thought it was hard to do the families in England, Europe, when they were all intermarrying families, and somebody's uncle was also their brother-in-law, and like all that. This takes it to another level because they're going right inside the immediate family. And did they not know? I guess they figure out later that really doesn't work out well for the babies. Like, does it take a while?
It does. I mean, like, it's also, the other confusing, there are a couple of confusing things. So first of all, the Greeks, like the Macedonians and the Greeks had pretty strong, like, anti-sibling marriage culturally, right? Like the rest of the sort of Greco-Roman world was really against this, including the Ptolemy the first generation would have been against this. But they did not fully realize the repercussions, and they're also sort of part of it is this claiming of being godlike, right? So even if there's a sense that this is a bad idea for humans, the idea is that you're really saying we are gods and we can behave like gods, and all the Egyptian gods, the Greek gods, the Roman gods, which obviously overlap pretty strongly with the Greek gods, they all marry their siblings. Like that's part of the idea of godliness there. So it's confusing, you would think, and it's also confusing because with the Ptolemies especially, it's never 100% clear. Which of them were actually how many of them were actually directly descended from like full-blooded brothers and sisters, right? Because there are a lot of there's a lot of concubine stuff. There's a lot of servants. There's a lot of question of like, and again, going back to Cleopatra's mother, like, was she Cleopatra Tryphena, who was either, which in my book, that is not my interpretation for a variety of reasons, but if it was Cleopatra Tryphena or if it was a concubine who definitely bore the three younger children of that generation, there's a question of who the mothers were and how closely related they were. Sometimes people think she was the half sister of Ptolemy the Piper, of Ptolemy 12. Sometimes people say she was the cousin. Like, their genealogies are so confused and tied together that it's never quite clear exactly how much was going on, because somehow, at least as far as we know, certainly Cleopatra lived to adulthood, and Berenice, her elder sister, and Arsinoe all made it to adulthood and seemed to, certainly Berenice and Cleopatra, who are better known in the record, to not have had, like, insane problems, which makes you sort of wonder exactly, like, what is the line with these marriages, like, which one of these marriages were actually consummated and actually had children, which one of them were like, oh, actually the child was begot on a concubine and it was sort of presented as the child of the royal couple. It's real. There are people who, you could study this for a million years. Certainly, as far as we can tell, like, some of them were, but the fact that they made it that far without completely screwing the genetic pool makes you think that there had to be some, like, some of these generations must have had new blood coming in, because otherwise it just seems like it would be so tangled genetically by the time we get to Cleopatra and Arsinoe.
Absolutely. And all right, so you had the first book, which is the one I read. Now hold up the second one, because I want to hear about this book, because this one just came out. Yes.
Yeah, this one came out in April.
Okay, so the other one was about, I want you to tell us, because just so everybody set the stage, the first one's about the sisters, okay, and Cleopatra's not really in it too much. Yeah. Makes appearance. They talk about her. And then it ends. You know, I don't know that I don't like giving, even though it's history. I don't like giving endings. But it ends. You know, and Cleopatra kind of returns.
Yes.
And then that comes to the Drowning King.
Yes. So the Drowning King takes place about 5 years later than Cleopatra's Shadows. Basically, like, Cleopatra's Shadows traces Berenice, who's Cleopatra's elder sister, has a rebellion against their father, during which time Cleopatra and their father flee to Rome to ask for help. And it basically traces the course of that rebellion, and also Arsinoe's experience being the younger child who is left behind both by her father and her sister and her mother and her little brothers, and sort of navigating this new world. In The Drowning King, we are sort of tracing the beginning of Cleopatra's rule. Okay. So it's not told from Cleopatra's perspective, it's told from the perspective of Ptolemy, her younger brother, who is, as we've discussed, not going to be a surprise here, is also her husband, even though he's quite young.
I was going to say, there's a big age difference there.
Yeah, they're 6 years apart. They're 6 years apart, and they're 8 years apart, and that's at a time, at a 10 to 18 time, when that is, at the beginning of the book, when that is a pretty, I mean, it's always a pretty significant gap, but 18 and 10 are very different ages. Right. So that's the sort of beginning, is sort of tracing his time as king and Arsinoe's time, and the sort of subsequent, as will probably not also come as a surprise, knowing that the Ptolemies fight among each other all the time. When their father dies and Cleopatra and Ptolemy assume the throne together, it's not like a love fest and everyone's happy. Instead, there are immediately a lot of problems and a lot of tensions between the two of them. So it basically traces that and how that affects Arsinoe's relationship with Cleopatra and sort of Ptolemy's struggle to step into a role that he is completely, in almost every way, unfit to actually assume, both in terms of age, temperament, etc. So
that's awesome. I'm so happy that you write books like this, because it opened up another world. And I think for a lot of people out there, and I did see some of the comments, people were saying, you know, this was so amazing because I didn't know so much about that time, and now I feel like I know a little bit. You know, I mean, it makes us, and it puts it in a family context that we can actually wrap our brains around, than if you were going to go look it up on Wikipedia and get lost like I did. Like, I don't suggest doing that. The way you have it, the way you had it done, I really get it. I really got the family dynamic out of it. And though, you know, there's a lot of historical fiction in it, because you certainly don't know and people don't know, but I thought it seemed really, like, realistic.
Well, I mean, like, I obviously did a lot of research and thought an enormous amount about these characters and, like, the world in which they lived, and a lot of the sort of, and just thinking, I mean, obviously I'm a writer, so obviously I feel that books and stories that we tell are really important, so I both did a lot of, like, historical research and also basically just read, like, like, all of this stuff, all of these stories that would have been in their heads, the stories that they would have grown up with for a long time, in order to sort of understand the sort of way of thinking or the way of framing the world that they would have had, which I think is sort of one of the hardest things looking back at the ancient world. Is we now live in a world that's so science-based, and not that there wasn't science that the Greeks were doing, there was, but there's just the level of unknown is just so much higher. Not that we still don't live with an enormous number of questions, but, like, all of the ways that people are trying to find explanations for, like, for dreaming, or for, like, what happens, like, what, like, all these things that we kind of understand now are just, you know, completely blank. And one of the things that I found most interesting in my research was reading even, like, the histories of this time period, like, written by people who consider themselves historians, who were the first historians. And they would just sit there, and then they would be like, and then you read about the Roman civil wars, and then Caesar had this dream, and they record the dream, because his dream is an essential part of this, or, like, and then they saw the omens of the eagles, and, like, doing this thing before the battlefield, and that is just as sort of essential to the telling of that story and the understanding of that story as what we consider now to be like historical facts.
Right.
Which it would be unusual to read a battlefield history now where someone's like, and then General so-and-so went to sleep. And like,
dream. And then we decided not to do that. But they took dreams really seriously. Even in biblical times, you know, that a lot of the Bible has dreams written in it. So, you know, like this goes way back that people were really paying attention to their dreams. I did love that aspect of it. I did love like her, you know, story with her dreams and everything. But okay, so now you've done these 2 books. And this says, did it say trilogy or series? Are you doing another one?
I am. I'm taking a little bit of a break right now. I'm working on a totally different project.
Okay.
But I am planning on coming back. The idea, I always thought of this as a 4-book series. Well, I guess I originally thought it was going to be 1 book in 4 parts, and then it kind of exploded into 4 books. It just got way too long. But I've always thought of it that way, in which each book sort of, like the overall story is following Arsinoe, right. And then each book has another one of her siblings as the secondary, well, not secondary, as the sort of co-narrator. So that's the sort of plan for the overall series.
Can you tell me about what is coming up, what you're working on, like right now?
It's the other thing that I'm working, but like totally not. Yeah. I am working. I'm working on a dystopian novel right now, which is really different. Obviously, I would say the big similarity is in terms of like the amount of world building that you're doing, because like with historical fiction, obviously you do a lot of research and you sort of like figure out how you want to like based on both your research and especially with something so far away in time, thinking about how to shape that and what that means and like how your characters view the world. So with this new project that I'm working on, which is not going to be a series because series these were my first books and they're great and I love them and I want to come back and I need a little like space to come back at it with like the fresh excitement.
Yes, exactly.
But the sort of so I guess one of the similarity is like thinking about how your characters in this very different world are still like superhuman and relatable and so close to us, and yet sort of see their world in a very different way and are shaped by a world that is both similar and very different from our own. So that's what I'm...
You know, I love the opportunity to be able to tell you like how much I love this book. You know, and to encourage you, like, on, you know, because authors hear so much. They hear especially young authors like you get, you know, all kinds of different messages. But, I mean, your writing is unbelievable. I listened and I read, and it was awesome. I mean, I really loved it. And I can't wait to read that one and then read the next, whatever that's coming up. So, you know, just keep writing. Keep writing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's such that's wonderful it is wonderful to hear. And it's not, you know, I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do, and it is also hard. So it is always really, really nice to hear people get excited about it, because that's why you write, so that people read, love it, and get excited.
Exactly, so. And I love you historical fiction writers. I love them. But hold up the covers, and I will have all of Emily's links beneath, but I want you to see the covers. Like, I love these covers. I don't know how much input you had on them, but that one, I mean, The Drowning King, look at that. That's just... they're super gorgeous. Little Brown did an amazing, amazing job. I can't really I was like, yeah, those look good. I can't take credit for them beyond that, but they did an amazing, amazing job with them. I think they look fabulous. So thank you. Yes. And just know people are out there recommending your books, and, you know, like I see you on Facebook all the time. So, you know, I'm sure that's awesome to hear too.
No, that's great. That's great. And please keep tell your friends, tell everybody.
That's what I'm doing. I'm telling all my friends.
You are. I appreciate that. That's fantastic.
Well, you have a great day, Emily, and we'll chat again. I can't wait to see what's coming up next for you, you know, so it'll be fun, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Okay, have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.